Today we're talking about the Jigsaw, the scroll saw, and the bandsaw. Three very popular saws that you might want to be using for your different woodworking projects. We're going to go through and dissect what each saw is used for, what it's good at, what it isn't very good at, and what its limitations are. Stay tuned.
Well, a lot of you might be interested in trying to decide what kind of saw to buy, and I'm going to take a look at three different saws today. Mainly they cut curves, or they're capable of cutting curves, and they're oftentimes thought of in terms of cutting curves. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at a scroll saw, we're going to look at a jigsaw, and we're going to look at a bandsaw. Now, the only one of these that's handheld, of course, is the jigsaw, and we'll explore why handheld might be of value to you. These two are larger and more fixed, and so that also can influence which one you might want to buy and which one would be appropriate for your use. As always, we would suggest that you subscribe, hit the subscribe button so that you will get notified of future content, which we intend to keep putting out. And if you like the video, we suggest you hit the like button, because that'll help us reach more people. So first, let's talk about the portable one, which is a jigsaw. A jigsaw has a blade that, I have a piece of wood stuck in here, but has a blade that reciprocates, and it goes up and down. And so the wood, it cuts wood in that fashion, and the blade reciprocates up into the saw and then back down. And it's set up so that it cuts on the upstroke, which means the weight of the saw will hold the board down, which is obviously a handy way to do it. And the blade is narrow, so you can guide this with your hand on the material you're cutting. Let's say, for instance, that I wanted to cut, and I hope you can make out this round feature here. I did it short. I want to go deeper. So we would then secure the workpiece like so. And then the jigsaw would sit on top of the workpiece, and I would turn it on and reciprocate and just go around like that, guiding it with my hand. Now the thinner the blade, this blade is about 1/4 of an inch. You can get them much thinner than that. And so the thinner the blade, the tighter turn you can make with the saw. Again, the thinner the blade, this way, the easier you can turn and the tighter turn you're able to make. These are inexpensive, relatively speaking. These are between, I would say, $35 and, well, you can spend a lot on them, but $35 to $100 for one of these. And they're very heavy duty, and they work very well, and they're very reliable. The blades don't break very often unless you get the very narrow blades and do very tight turns. You have more of a chance of breaking blades in tight turns on thick material. You are somewhat limited on the thickness that you can cut, because this blade goes up about 3/4 of an inch and down 3/4 of an inch. So you can see you're not going to be able to cut a piece of wood wider than about that, thicker than about that. And that would be sort of a limitation of this saw. But it's portable, and you can take it to the piece of wood you want to cut rather than having to bring the piece of wood in. And in fact, a piece of wood might be very large, and we'll see that with the other two saws, the size of the wood, that is the dimensions of the surface area of the wood, are very important and can be a limiting factor. So let's next look at the scroll saw. Now, the scroll saw could do this same type of cut that we just did with the jigsaw. You would put it in here like this, and you would go forward and turn this and complete the cut. But as you can see here, there's a limitation to this saw because I have a large piece of wood, a very wide piece of wood, and if I want to go around this corner, I will bang into it back there. Now, in many cases, you can simply start at the other side and go the other way, and then you'll be able to fit it in. But you have to realize there's a limitation. And when you buy a scroll saw, the size of this throat very much determines the cost of the saw. This saw is also a reciprocating saw, but it reciprocates in a little bit different manner. The blade goes up and down, and you set the teeth to cut on the downstroke, which is pushing the wood you're cutting into this solid table. And then on the upstroke, it's not cutting, and it only cuts on the downstroke. So there's an arm coming out on the top, which holds the top of this blade, and you can't see it, but underneath there's another arm here that holds the bottom of the blade. So the blade reciprocates up and down rapidly, and that's how it cuts. I'll turn it on so that you can see that. So you feed the wood in, and you can make curved cuts with the limitation of the throat size. Now you also have somewhat of a limitation on the thickness you can cut. However, it's extreme, and I can go, I have this wood holder here that holds the wood down against the table, and you can see that that is a thicker piece of wood than we would have been able to cut with this jigsaw. So it has a limitation on the dimension that you can turn through it, but it can cut thicker than this saw. Now let's talk about a bandsaw. This is a bandsaw. The way a bandsaw works, it has a blade, and let me put this guard up so that you can see the blade. This is a wide blade, a 1/2-inch blade. And the blade is a continuous welded piece of metal that's in a loop. And this loop goes across wheels. And there's one wheel on the top, and there's another wheel down at the bottom. And so the blade just goes around and around and around. And it also has the teeth pointing down, so it cuts by pushing the wood into the table. The limitations on this saw are, once again, the largest width piece of wood you can pass through here, either on a straight cut or a curved cut, is the distance between the blade and where the blade comes down here on the left-hand side. Now, thickness, you have much less limitation because I can change this support piece to go close to a piece of wood that isn't very thick, but on the other hand, I can cut pieces of wood that are fairly thick. You can see that that's at least 6 inches, and you can buy bigger bandsaws. This is not a particularly expensive bandsaw. It is a freestanding bandsaw. You can also buy benchtop bandsaws, but you can see you're somewhat limited because this lower wheel would be sitting on top of the bench, at least a base that fits about there. You can cut curves with a bandsaw, although you would fit it with a narrower blade. These blades come anywhere from a 1/2 inch in this dimension, this way, to down to at least 1/4 of an inch. And if you have a 1/4 inch blade, and I believe you can get an 1/8 inch blade, although they're a little fragile, 1/4 inch blade, you can cut fairly radical turns, not nearly what you can do with this scroll saw, but equivalent to what you can do probably with the jigsaw. You can also do something with this bandsaw that you can't possibly do with either of those saws, and that's referred to as resawing. So if I put a fence here and put it up fairly close, here's a piece of wood that's a 1/2 inch thick. Let's say I wanted I wanted it to be a 1/4 inch thick for the project I'm working on. Well, this one's too tall, but if it were a little bit less, it would fit under here, and I could put it against this fence and go into the blade, and I would saw this piece of wood down the middle and make it thinner. So I can make a sizable piece of wood thinner using a 1/2 inch blade like this and a fence. So let's summarize and wrap this up, okay? Again, our 3 saws are the Jigsaw. This Jigsaw is portable, and you can take it to the job. You don't have to bring the job to your shop. That's a big advantage. It cuts curves, and it cuts those curves fairly tight, and you can control how tight you are able to cut by the thickness of the blade that you purchase and put in here. By the way, a feature that I'm in the summary, I should have shown this earlier, a feature of this that makes it much better than either of these other 2 saws is how easy it is to change the blade. You simply, well, I have that piece of wood jammed in there, but in theory, you just pull this blade out. And so I can then change blades virtually in an instant. If I have to change blades on the scroll saw, I have to unfasten the blade both on top and bottom and do some manipulation, which takes maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And if I have to change this bandsaw blade, I have to take the blade entirely off and put a new one on, and that operation takes about 10 minutes. So back to the summary. With the Jigsaw, you take it to the job, and you don't bring the job to the saw. You can cut corners, curves, and you can do those fairly good, especially fairly nice and smooth with a little bit of practice. It's a safe saw. It is limited in the thickness of the wood that you can cut, and that's really about the only limitation. The scroll saw, you can cut very, very sharp turns. I made a jigsaw puzzle out of wood using this saw one time, and that's a lot of intricate cutting, as you can well imagine, but the blade is only about 1/8 of an inch in dimension, so you can cut very tight turns with this. It does a very nice smooth job and gives you a smooth cut. Its limitation, it's limited in thickness to how, basically to the depth of the throat and how far it goes up and down, and it's limited in the length of wood that you can cut on a curve because of this arm mechanism, because it has to fit in the distance between the blade and the back of this arm. And then the third saw is the bandsaw. It's a much heavier duty saw. It can cut curves, but not nearly as tight as the other 2 saws. And in order to do that, you need to change to a thinner blade, which is a longer operation. Its limitations, its thickness limitation, it can cut a lot greater thickness because of the way this mechanism works, and it slides up and down. The other limitation is the width of the board that you can go through here, either on a straight cut or a curve cut. You're limited by the distance between the blade on the right-hand side and the blade guard on the left-hand side. And the other added advantage to this particular saw is that you can resaw, that is, make boards thinner by putting them through vertically up against a fence. So, hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please hit the like button, and we suggest you subscribe, and we'll keep you posted on all of our new posts coming up.